My grandmother always told me never to visit the lake behind our town after dawn. She never explained why, just said it the way she said everything important, once, clearly, without room for argument. I was maybe 12 or 13 when she first said it, and I remember thinking it was just one of those old people things, a superstition dressed up as a rule. I grew up in a small house right beside that lake. It was my grandmother's house originally. She had lived there for most of her life before I came to stay with her during my early teenage years. The lake itself was not dramatic, not deep, not wide, nothing that looked dangerous on the surface. Just a quiet stretch of water surrounded by trees on 3 sides and our small neighborhood on the 4th. Kids swam in it during summer afternoons. Families walked the path around it on weekends. It was just a lake. Except my grandmother would not go near it after the sun went down, and she never told me why. I asked her once, directly, what her reason was. She looked at me for a moment and then said that some places hold things that are better left undisturbed, and that the lake after dark was one of them. That was the full explanation. I filed it away as something I would probably never understand and moved on. That was 2008. I was 13. I followed the rule for 2 years without incident and without question, partly because I respected her and partly because there was genuinely no reason to be at the lake after dark anyway. Then, the summer of 2010 happened, and I stopped following it. It started with a group of older kids from the neighborhood who had decided the lake at night was the ideal place to sit around and do nothing in particular. They were 16, 17, the kind of age where the value of a rule is measured entirely by how inconvenient it is to break. I was 15 and trying very hard not to seem like I was 15. So when they invited me one evening, I said yes without thinking too much about it. We went around 9 p.m. 4 of us, 1 flashlight between us, sitting on the flat rocks near the eastern bank where the trees thinned out enough to see the water clearly. It was a warm night. The lake was still. Nothing about it felt different from how it looked in the afternoon, except that the color of the water was darker, and the tree line on the far bank had become a solid wall of black. We sat there for maybe an hour, and nothing happened, and I remember thinking my grandmother was just an old woman with an old fear of a completely ordinary lake. We went home. I slept fine. The next day, I said nothing about it to her. The second time was a week later. Same group, same spot, slightly later in the evening. I remember it was closer to 10 because the neighbors across the road had already turned their lights off when we snuck past. This time, one of the older boys had brought a radio, and we sat there longer than the first time, maybe 2 hours, talking about nothing important. It was around the 90-minute mark that one of the girls in the group said the water looked different on the far side of the lake. I looked where she was pointing. The far bank was dark the way it always was at night, but she was right that something about it looked slightly different from the previous week. There was a section of the tree line, maybe 30 meters across, where the darkness seemed thicker than it should have been. Not a shadow exactly, more like an area where the light from the moon was not reaching the water the way it was reaching the rest of it. The boy with the radio said it was just cloud cover. We accepted that and moved on. I did not fully accept it. I looked at the sky. There were no clouds directly overhead that would have explained it. I didn't say anything. The third time, I went alone. I don't have a clean explanation for why I did that. 15-year-old logic is not always traceable. I think part of it was that the 2 previous visits had produced nothing, and I wanted to settle the question in my own mind, to stand at the lake after dark by myself and confirm that my grandmother's rule was based on nothing real. The way you sometimes need to prove a thing to yourself before you can fully let it go. I went on a Tuesday night in late July 2010, just after 9:30. I told my grandmother I was going to bed early and waited until I heard her bedroom door close before I slipped out through the back. The lake at night alone is a different experience from the lake at night with company. I understood that immediately.
The sounds were the same: water, insects, the occasional movement in the trees. But without other people there to absorb the atmosphere, the place had a weight to it that I had not noticed before. A quality of stillness that felt less like quiet and more like something holding its breath. I sat on the flat rocks and I watched the water, and everything was fine for the first 20 minutes. Then I noticed that the far bank had that same area of thick darkness again. Same location as before, same rough size. And this time, there were no clouds anywhere in the sky. The moon was clear and full, and casting good light across most of the lake's surface. But that section of the far bank was absorbing it somehow, standing apart from the rest of the darkness in a way that I could not explain with weather or shadow or any other reasonable thing. I watched it for a while. It did not move. It did not change. It just sat there on the far bank, being wrong in a way that was too subtle to point at directly. Then I noticed that the water directly in front of that section of the bank was not moving the same way as the rest of the lake's surface. The rest of the water had that faint, gentle movement that still water always has, the tiny shifts from wind and natural current. But the water in front of that dark section was completely flat, like something was sitting just beneath the surface there, stilling it from below. I stood up. I want to tell you I left immediately. I didn't. I stood there on those rocks for probably another 3 or 4 minutes, just looking at that section of the far bank, because my brain was doing that thing where it keeps searching for the normal explanation, even after the normal explanations have run out. And while I was standing there, still looking at the far bank, I became aware that the insect sounds around me had stopped. Not gradually. Between 1 second and the next, the constant background noise of a summer night just went absent. No crickets, no movement in the grass, nothing, just the water and my own breathing. That was when I started walking back to the house. I did not run. I want to be clear about that because it matters to me. I walked at a controlled pace back along the path toward the house, and I did not look behind me for most of it. But near the end of the path, maybe 30 meters from our back gate, I looked back once. The lake was dark and still. The far bank was just trees. Whatever thickness had been sitting in that section of the tree line was gone. But the water in front of where it had been was still flat, still completely flat in a way that the rest of the surface wasn't. I went inside, and I did not go back. My grandmother was in the kitchen when I came in. She was sitting at the table with a cup of tea like she had been waiting, though she said nothing about where I had been. She just looked at me for a moment and then looked back at her cup. I almost told her. I sat down across from her and I opened my mouth and I almost said I went to the lake and I think I understand now. But she spoke first. She said, "You look like you need some water." She got up and filled the glass and set it in front of me and sat back down, and that was the end of it. She never asked where I had been. I never told her what I saw. We sat in that kitchen for another 20 minutes, drinking our respective things and not talking about the lake. And that was somehow the most unsettling part of the whole night, the way she already knew without needing me to say it. She passed away in 2014. I helped clear out the house afterward and found a small notebook in her bedside drawer. Most of it was personal, lists, notes, the kind of private record-keeping old people do. But near the back, there were 2 pages written in her handwriting that I have thought about many times since. She had written a list of dates going back to the 1970s. Each date had a short note beside it. Some of them said things like, "Water was wrong again," or "The flat patch came back." The last entry was from 2009, a year before my 3 visits, and it said simply, "It has been there longer than I have." I don't know what she saw over those decades.
I don't know what she understood about that lake that she never found a way to explain to me directly. I just know that she watched it for 40 years and wrote down every time it showed itself, and never once tried to investigate it further. There is a particular kind of wisdom in leaving something alone that you do not understand. My grandmother had it completely. It took me 3 visits and a notebook full of dates to understand why. I have not been back to that lake after dark since the summer of 2010. The house was sold after she passed. Someone else lives there now with their family. I hope nobody ever told them about the rule, and I hope they figured it out on their own before it mattered.